had to walk with me to the airport. They had to get me out of that hotel and into the property here.
In 1964, Malcolm X broke with the Nation of Islam to form his own organization based on orthodox Muslim principles, which include a respect for all races and religions. And how did Louis Farrakhan react? He began writing incendiary editorials in the Nation of Islam's newspaper.
Let me read you what you wrote in December of 1964. The die is set, and Malcolm shall not escape, especially after such evil, foolish talk about his benefactor, Elijah Muhammad, in trying to rob him of the divine glory which Allah has bestowed upon him. Such a man as Malcolm is worthy of death. This was only 2 months before he was shot down. This was only 2 months before he was shot down. That is why people believe that you were responsible for the death of Malcolm X.
No, not at all. My name was not among those at that time who were considered the players.
Considered a holy man by his followers in the Nation of Islam. And eventually Malcolm became the spokesman for the nation, at the time preaching that the white man was evil and calling for the separation of the races. And along the way, Louis Farrakhan, a former nightclub singer, became Malcolm's student, his acolyte. And Malcolm taught Farrakhan how to live as a black Muslim. Example, Nation of Islam members don't eat pork, don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, and do not have sex outside marriage.
It is worthy, if you will, of expulsion.
That is correct.
Adultery.
That is correct. Fornication was worthy of expulsion.
But in 1963, Malcolm X learned that Elijah Muhammad himself had repeatedly committed adultery with some of his teenage secretaries and had children with them. Malcolm agonized over his discovery, and in June of 1964, he told me about it.
And he called some of these women who were living in Los Angeles at the time and let me listen to the conversation. And it became apparent that he was telling the truth. He told you about that, yes?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, Malcolm was aware of other tensions growing within the Nation of Islam, for his popularity had begun to surpass that of Elijah Muhammad.
There was envy
Envy of Malcolm.
of Malcolm.
By
There
you?
No, never by me.
Never by you.
Never by me. Never. I truly loved this man.
Who envied him?
There are those in the circle who feared the kind of publicity that he was getting, the kind of attention that he was getting. He was the most vocal. He was the most loved. He was the most honored and respected.
And he outshone the Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
In certain areas, yes.
He used their newspaper to slander me and to label me as a hypocrite and as a rebel. And Mr. Muhammad himself said that I defected. Well, in reality, I never even left the Muslim movement. They put me out. And they put me out because of what I knew. And what I knew was told to me by Mr. Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad himself. They put me out and they put him out.
Well, now, first of all, let's find out what it is that Wallace Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad's son, told you.
Well, number one, if you notice, the stick that I always used in presenting, representing, and defending the Muslim movement was the fact that it had the ability to reform the morals of the so-called Negro community. It eliminated drug addiction, alcoholism, fornication, adultery, loose sex, sexual behavior, which meant that it eliminated bastard babies, illegitimate children. Well, as long as I knew that this was what it represented and it gave me a strong stick, I could represent it and defend it.
Who is the father of all of these various children whom you have enumerated?
The first one to tell me who the father was Wallace Muhammad, and he told me that the father was Elijah Muhammad himself. One of the sisters, he went to the home of one of the sisters, and when he walked in the door, she said, "I want to let you see something." And she showed him her child. She said, "Here's your brother, and your father is the father of this child." And then I questioned the sisters myself, because I was shook up. and they admitted to me that Elijah Muhammad was the father of their children. And I took it to him. And it was at that time he told me that he was Muhammad, the prophet, and that Muhammad had 9 wives. He also told me that he was David. He was the modern David, and that he was the modern Solomon, and that it was meant for him to fulfill today all of the things that they did back then.
And how many of these illegitimate children did he father with the sisters?
Well, he made 6 sisters pregnant. They all had children. 2 of those 6 had 2 children. One of those 2 is having a child right now. I am told that there is a 7th sister who is supposed to be in Mexico right now, and she's supposed to be having a child by him. For one thing, when you first separate from your wife, it's a physical separation, but it's not psychological. You still have feelings for her, and you protect her. But after the physical separation has taken place for a while, it becomes a psychological separation. It was the same way with me in the Muslim movement. When I first separated, it was a physical separation, but my feeling was still there. And it was only after my trip into the Muslim world and my pilgrimage to Mecca that I really was able to exercise the objective approach to it that enabled me to see that something had to be done to bring this to light. Otherwise, a whole lot of innocent people would be killed needlessly. We had a law which was that whenever any Muslim became involved in any kind of sexual relationship with someone to whom they weren't married, that person would be brought before the Muslim community, humiliated, and then isolated from 1 to 5 years. This was our law. Well, in 1954, a teenage sister left Detroit and became one of Mr. Muhammad's personal secretaries. And there in the Chicago office, she became pregnant after being there for a year. And she was brought before the Muslim community and humiliated and isolated. And a year later, another secretary, this time one from Lansing, Michigan, came to Chicago. She also became pregnant. She was brought before the community and humiliated and isolated. And because the other person was never brought forth during this court session, it was concluded by all of Mr. Muhammad's followers that it was a non-Muslim who was the other party. Well, we grew so rapidly that in 1957 or 58, the secretarial staff was expanded to, I think, 8 teenage sisters. In 1959, 6 of them disappeared. 2 of them reappeared in Philadelphia about 2 or 3 months later, and they were all right. The other 4 reappeared in 1960. All 4 of them had babies. All 4 of them had become involved with someone and become pregnant and had these children. So it was, from what I now know, when the 4 of them got back to Chicago and began to compare notes, they found that the same man had told all of them the same story and had made all of them pregnant. That the same man was the father of all 4 of their children and had also been the father of the children brought forth by the 2 secretaries who preceded them. So this story was kept among these sisters until 1962. 2 of them rebelled against the person who was responsible and began to tell the story all over the city of Chicago. It caused many of the Muslims in the Chicago mosque to leave and go back out in the street. They knew it, and I knew nothing about it until 1963 when Mr. Muhammad's son, who had been in prison, came out, and he had been a minister. He was very religious and spiritual, and when he began to hear these rumors around Chicago, he went to one of the sisters, and the sister admitted to him that the rumor was true. And it was he who first told me about it. And when he told me about it, I wrote to Mr. Muhammad and told him about it, and he admitted that he had a knowledge of it, and that he'd given me a religious explanation that would fit into prophecy and all of that. So I was quiet, and it wasn't until October of 1963 that it came up again. And when it came up again, I realized that the same person who had made these other sisters pregnant was still busy doing the same thing. He hadn't stopped. 2 of the sisters had 2 children by the same man. And one of those 2 sisters was pregnant still, getting ready to have a 3rd child by the same man. So when it was known among the Chicago officials that I had a knowledge of this, they became very fearful of me. They became very antagonistic toward me, and they had to do something to diminish the authority that I had for fear that if this became public knowledge, the followers would leave the Muslim movement and follow me. And it was at that time that they used the statement that I made against President Kennedy as a pretext to cut my authority and some other things happened that finally produced the split, or forced the split. And when I made the split, the only reason that I didn't make this public knowledge was I knew the implications, and I felt that if the Muslims who were in the Nation of Islam knew it, that which enabled them to be so strongly religious and exercise moral discipline would be shattered, and it would cause all of them to go right back and start doing the things that they had been doing previously. When you understand the makeup of the Muslim movement and the psychology of the Muslim movement, as long as if I myself, by having confidence in the leader of the Muslim movement, if someone came to me and I had no knowledge whatsoever of what had taken place, and they told me what I'm saying, I would kill them myself. The only thing that would prevent me from killing someone who made a statement like this, they would have to be able to let me know that it's true. Now, if anyone had come to me other than Mr. Muhammad's son, I never would have believed it, even enough to look into it. But I had been around him so closely, I had seen indications of the reality of it, but my religious sincerity made me block it out of my mind.
Have you received threats on your life?
Oh, yes. I first received threats on my life in December. In December. No, not in December, in January. When it first became known that I had come back to New York and told the captain of the fruit in New York, who was my right-hand man formerly, and also the secretary of the New York Mosque and the minister in Boston. When it became known that I had told them, then an effort was made to shut me up. He may try and justify it by saying that he's a Muslim, and that a Muslim has a right to these wives. If this were the case, these sisters should not have been humiliated.
Your message, apparent message of love that you brought back from Islam is the real reason they're after you, because you're not hating as hard as they want you to.
Well, I never did hate anybody hard. But I do know that when I wrote that letter saying that there were white people in Mecca, they shook up a lot of Muslims, because most of the Muslims who follow Mr. Muhammad absolutely believed that it was impossible, physically impossible, I should say divinely impossible, for a white person to go to Mecca. And my trip there shattered that image, or this concept.
Following those editorials, Malcolm and his family received numerous death threats from whom no one knows for sure.
Are you not, perhaps, afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
Leave Minister Malcolm alone. Those were orders. Those were instructions to us. Leave this man alone.
But in February of 1965, while the family was asleep, Malcolm's home in New York was firebombed. And just 1 week later, 39-year-old Malcolm X was gunned down by members of the Nation of Islam.
Anyone call you directly, Malcolm? I've been receiving calls ever since I left the Black Muslim movement.
And what sort of calls, Malcolm? Are disenchanted in view of the fact that these men who were your brothers are making threats against your life?
No, because actually it's not their fault. Most of them, now Joseph and the officials, they have a knowledge of what it's all about. But the rank and file Muslim brother does not know what it's all about. They are out of religious sincerity. They think that they are doing the will of Allah.
Are you not, perhaps, afraid of what might happen to you as a result of making these revelations?
Oh, yes. I probably am a dead man already.
I'm a child with a forever memory of the most significant man in my life standing at a podium and falling backwards. That's forever.
These sisters have been looked upon for the past 5 years, or 6 years, or 7 years as being guilty of having committed fornication. They have been debased. They have been degraded. I have heard him himself refer to them as having disgraced him. So if they were his wives, he should have given them a position of respect, so that all of his followers would respect him, and that they would have the protection of his followers today.
Would you just say a quick word? We only have 10 minutes on the satellite.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Brothers and sisters, I just want to say that all the years that I worked with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad before he asked me to be his wife, there was never any kind of out-of-turn words, no sexual harassment. He treated us with the highest form of dignity and respect. When he came to me and asked me to be his ago, he sat down, as our beloved Brother Minister Farrakhan said, and opened the Holy Quran to the place where it dealt with the wives. He loved his wife, Sister Clara Muhammad, and his children. But he said Allah was forcing him to do this for future generations. There's much I could say, but I want you to know that he was an honorable man. He is an honorable man, and he stood for the respect of all black women around the world.
From Sister Evelyn Muhammad, the one you saw in the movie that Evelyn was holding in her arm. This is the daughter. My son married this daughter and produced 6 children. 5 sons and 1 daughter. And these are the grandchildren of Elijah Muhammad and the grandchildren of Louis Farrakhan. They are brilliant, and I see in them the spark of their grandfather and their ages-old great-grandparents, that they would be lights among the people. This is what God is doing. My brother Hannibal Afrique sits here. He's a student of African culture. You go to Africa, you see the chiefs. They got wives and they got children, and nobody's accusing the chief of being a chief man in Africa, in Asia, and among all the societies of our people. Is that the truth, brothers? Sister Ola, would you have a word?
Assalamu alaikum. I like to tell you that I agree and bear witness with Minister Farrakhan. I'm a south side of Chicago, raised and born. I work with you in the community. At daycare, I'm a registered nurse. I come and see many of you often. I bear witness that everything Elijah ever taught us about eating, cleaning, raising our children was true. I am a product of the Interest School of Chicago, yet I could talk to scholars. I've raised my son as he instructed me to do, and I am quite pleased with the life that he has given to me over 40-something years. Run jobs and in the hospitals and communities with people, they think I'm 32. My son is 32. This is because of the great teaching that our messenger, my husband, brought to you, all of us. The wrong foods we eat raise the blood pressure, give you diabetes, high blood pressure. Once you get high blood pressure, you're definitely going to have kidney failure and an early death. Elijah Muhammad said, drop that swine. It's making you ugly and it's killing you. Now we have Minister Louis Farrakhan picking up the banner. Carrying on with this great teaching that we all need. Elijah gave him the keys. Malcolm never had enough knowledge to hold the keys. He did not have it. And I'm sorry to say, as my husband said, he died lost and a hypocrite. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
I have heard him himself refer to them as having disgraced him.
Louis Farrakhan, picking up the banner. Carrying on with this great teaching that we all need. Elijah gave him the keys. Malcolm never had enough knowledge to hold the keys. He did not have it. And I'm sorry to say, as my husband said, he died lost and a hypocrite. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
I'm not seeking for the loyalty of any Negro, but I am seeking that Negroes to learn how to be loyal to themselves. And when the Negro learns how to be loyal to himself, our problem is pretty well solved.
Do you feel that...
But
we have to say that adult men between the ages of 20 and 40, black faces, who chose to put a trigger in their hands and unload until it was empty, have to be culpable. You can't keep pointing the finger because my father was not killed from a grassy knoll. And I have sisters who are spun out into this environment as tumbleweed, unhealed. We knew to stay silent because as a child, I thought it could happen to me. That if I spoke up or said something, they'd take my mother. They'd take one of us. I got to hear reports of the traitor deserved it, so it never could go away. Those reports didn't come from the government. Those reports did not come from the police. They came from the tan and brown and black faces that once claimed themselves as family members. And if we dealt with him like a nation,